All right, welcome everybody to the core developer meeting. Yep, audio's working. Let's jump right into it. It's been a month, wow. Um, and I'm half awake, so apologies in advance. Um, let's see. If you refresh the agenda, which I'll paste into the chat, I think I just added testing, and that was about it. But if anyone wants to look that over, um, let's see. And then anyone who's on a phone, if you could mute while everyone else is talking, that'd be great. So the first agenda topic, we're gonna go with testing. So Dimitri, do you have any updates or anybody else in the room on testing?
Hi, hello.
Hello.
Continue developing this RPC methods with a read test tool, and I'm upgrading CVB client, and I found out that some of the tests are actually wrong, some of the state tests, and I'm currently investigating what was exactly the issue and refilling those broken tests. It is a pull request to the testing repository. And if you'd like, actually, I would like client developers to try out those new updated tests. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my changes to CVP client wrong or something. But I think those tests were incorrect.
Have you seen have they been active on Hive, and how are the clients reacting on the Hive test?
Yeah, another issue that some of the tests might not made it to the Hive because old version of test-it tried to construct transaction, and in some cases the transaction was throwing an exception, and the blockchain test out of the state test appeared to be without any transaction at all. So there are some cases which actually just not testing anything just because transaction not constructed in testing. So I fixed that issue now.
Okay, but if you have fixed it and pushed it to master, we should be able to see within a day or so,
I
right?
don't think that I'm gonna push those state tests in blockchain form to the Hive anytime soon. I'm using this retest tool now, and those tests are generated via RPC. So about this issue, there are other issues with because when I execute the transaction via RPC on a client, it's somehow different. It's using the Ethereum node logic, and so sometimes the post state is different. Like right now, I see that is a mining reward set to 0 in the I use the mine block method now, and the Coinbase account is touched, and it appears in the final state. So it's minor issues like this, but sometimes it's different. It might be another issue. More.
Okay, could you, I mean, the tests that you think were previously invalid and are now fixed, could you make a list of those and put in the all core devs channel?
Yeah, those tests. I'm committing those tests to pull request to the test repository now. It's already open, but
Okay,
it is
yeah.
state tests. I hope that Go client has a state test implemented, right?
Yes, it does.
So the pull request number is 437.
Thank you. Yeah, we can check it out.
Great. Is there any other updates with testing?
Yep, I would add a bit. We had in the Taipei meetup a long-ish discussion with Piper, and I think also Frederick from Parity chipped in a bit, at least for part of it, where Piper was saying that the Python team, actually the Web3 Pi implementation, are using Go Ethereum and Parity nodes in the background to check the correctness of their Web3 implementation, client library implementation. And he said that currently that's a huge pain for them to test because essentially it's really, really hard to uniformly configure a chain for different clients. And so this kind of ties in nicely together with Dimitri's approach that so Dimitri wanted to have a unified interface to set up tests for the consensus tests and run them. It would be a really nice addition to that if we could actually set them up in such a case that they would also cater for properly testing the RPC methods, just because currently there's no unified test suite for RPC, simply because it's really, really hard to set up common states for the nodes. So I think it would be really nice to go towards that direction too. There's in the interfaces repo, there's a discussion going on. I'll just paste it here if I can find it somehow. Yeah, whatever, I'll paste it in a moment. So we had that interesting discussion, and we also had an idea that actually might help the ecosystem long term. In that, the interesting thing about this test RPC endpoint would be that not only could it actually assemble chains locally and just run transaction and see what happens, but if we have such an endpoint, then we actually can extend it so that it could also export these state tests or whatnot tests. And it would be, if we have these two-way things that we can import state tests and we can export state tests, then this kind of becomes a really, really powerful thing, because all of a sudden we can, for example, set up a bounty page like web service, which is a simple interface where you can just configure a chain, submit some Solidity code, submit some transactions, and actually have it tested against all client implementations. And then it would be a really useful tool for the community, where they could just, if they, for example, if I am implementing some quirk in the EVM and I see that this is a sensitive thing which may or may not be broken in other clients, then instead of having to dig through their source code and either find it or not find it, it would be really nice to just I can create quickly a test case and just submit it against all the clients and have it fail or not fail. So we are talking about it would be nice if we had such a tool. Of course, nobody has the capacity to develop such a tool, but if we have the RPC endpoints properly spec'd out, then the rest is mostly just creating a nice enough HTML page or web page. Okay, let's not call it HTML. So that might be an interesting thing to pursue.
What do you mean by export test?
So basically, you have these JSON text fixtures or whatnot, and to be able to export that.
You mean just developing a web interface where a user could construct their own tests in some friendly way, and then
yes, so exporting it, by exporting it, I really meant that, for example, if I create a test case in Go Ethereum for whatever, then it would be really sweet if I could actually export that into a text fixture and just run it against the others without having to actually manually construct the other one, the whole thing. The web interface would be just something that would allow the community to actually try and reproduce issues or test issues against different clients. So essentially, my point really with this whole thing was that currently we only have consensus tests for the EVM, and the RPC itself in none of the clients is tested, which usually ends up with all the clients have their own little quirks. And then we have test RPC and Truffle and various other clients just constantly opening bug tickets that, hey, this works differently. Hey, Parrot is encoding it this way and Go Ethereum is encoding it that way, and weird issues like this. And if we were to have some common interfaces, that at least we could roll out a proper test suite for it.
So that was the plan, like develop RPC protocol for the tests, and any clients with the implementation of that protocol could run the test by using our new test tool.
Yeah, but my point was that so the RPC that we spec'd out last time was only for running consensus tests, but the thing that we were discussing with Piper and Frederick would also allow to, after you construct whatever EVM test and you run it, you could actually have a full RPC interface for it where you could actually pull the node for data and interact with the node. For example, I could ask the node to trace the last transaction. That's not possible with the current consensus test mechanism.
Well, not yet. So the new consensus test mechanism relies on RPC. So if we define a test RPC method for tracing the transaction, it will also be possible.
Yeah, but that's my whole point. That if we have to define an API for everything, then why not just use the? Anyway, we're kind of going into the spec details. I think that's beyond the point of this discussion now. I'll just I'll paste it a spec, and then everyone who's interested can actually comment there. So we're kind of open to suggestions from all the teams, because the idea would be that it is only useful if actually all the teams are kind of implementing something meaningful. So it should be kind of a common thing to define the whole thing. So let's continue this discussion on that thread.
Yeah, let's definitely work to collaborate on that, since it sounds like Dimitri has made another test standard that probably is a little different than what you guys are doing, but just to make sure that those match up as well, so there's not a bunch of competing ones necessarily.
So I think Dimitri's direction in general is very good. Just he was more focused on getting the consensus stuff tested.
Yeah, it's my primary objective to make all of the existing tests working again.
Yeah, so I completely agree with that. I was just so the reason why this discussion came up with Piper is that if we are going towards this direction, then let's spec it out and make it useful for other stuff too, so that we don't have to create a second test number 2 RPC endpoint in a half a year.
Okay, cool. Let's see. I don't think, is there anything else on testing? Otherwise, we'll go to the next topic. Okay. Lefteris wanted to discuss EIP 712. and that is involving. Let me look at it real quick. And on the agenda, if you click the link, it goes into the comment that Lefteris left. Um, and it's about eth sign type data. So, Lefteris, if you want to talk about that a little bit, and then we'll see if anyone has comments.
Yeah, so can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Cool. All right. So yeah, this is basically an AIP for to propose an addition of an RPC method to sign arrays for any kind of arbitrary data, so that the signer's UI can easily show to the user what they are signing, and so that they can actually be sure of the values that they are signing, because right now they just see a hash and they don't know what that is. And at the same time, we want it to be machine verifiable. So the discussion has been continuing for quite a long time. Recently, also Christian Lund, I think his name, found a malleability issue that a proposal to fix it has already been made using the new API encoding of Solidity and a schema hash of essentially the data that are being signed. So there is also another EIP, the 719, that I would say is like this EIP but on steroids. So they also want to how do you say that, to create a provable way to the contract that the user has seen it in a particular way, so they can also prove that the UI is shown in a particular way, not only the values that are signed. And the reason why I mention this is that the discussion has been drifting away and it's going a bit off scope right now. And I would like to try and ask for the opinion of people here or people from the community of how we can keep this EIP, so 712, to as little a scope as possible and have it finalized as soon as possible, since many applications, many dApps, including something that my team and I are working on, MicroRiden, are waiting for quite so with a lot of patience for quite a few months now. That's mostly it.
Cool. Does anyone have a comment on that? Otherwise, I have one.
Yeah, I have a comment, and I think it's very good that these things are being specified. But I would have liked to see some more people in this discussion. And I reached out to a couple of people, Dan Finlay from MetaMask, and it would have been good if Nick Johnson or Liggy was here as well to weigh in on it. But I think there's at the moment there are huge issues with the way that the client signs text, and that is also something that needs to be sorted out. And I don't know if that's discussed within the scope of EAP 712, or if 712 is only for more complex data types.
No, it's only discusses, I think, just signing like an array of data and typed data, essentially, so that the user can know what is the type and what is the value that he's signing.
What was your comment, Hudson?
Oh, I was just noticing on this that it looked like at the very recently there was an alternative suggested, specifically 191. Um, uh, is that something that could work, Lefteris? 191? Oh, sorry. That's actually from Martin, I think.
Yes, from Martin. Maybe he can give an opinion, because I haven't looked it into too much detail yet.
So 191 is a pretty old one that I wrote a while back. I don't think it solves the problems.
Yeah, this
and I
seems more
don't
like a
think
UI problem.
Yes, and EAP 191 also suffers from some of the problems that our current signed data has, that it doesn't say how large the total envelope of the message is. And there's a kind of malleability in that. The way that it works right now, we have the number x19 Ethereum signed message, and then a length and then the message, but we don't have the total length, which is a big blunder.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, there's been a bunch of discussion on this, so I think this, at minimum, is this a draft yet, Lefteris? Let's see.
712, you mean?
Yes.
I don't know. It has not been, just discussion has
Just
been done.
discussion.
So I
Okay. Yeah, I see this as a candidate for potentially being accepted at some point. Absolutely. And we should at least make it a draft as a PR. So I'll make a note to kind of comment on that. So 712 is a PR. And work on that by making a comment on that EIP. Does other people have comments on this?
I was wondering, I just talked to Liggy and he's installing Zoom right now. Maybe we could return to this a bit later.
Yeah, no problem. We'll put this on
Yeah,
hold
sure,
then.
that'll be great.
Great. Um, so let's see. What's the next agenda topic? I lost the tab. Here we are. Okay, EIP process updates. This also will include the Ethereum Magicians meeting that recently happened. So the EIP editors have been talking, and the first step that we're taking in, I guess, updating the EIPs in general is making a really nice interface, and this is actually all spearheaded by Nick, so I should say that out front. It's Nick Johnson is making a really cool Jekyll-based interface where, as EIPs are submitted, they are automatically entered into a website that's easier to read and easier to collect the data of. The EIPs, that's not released yet, but a lot of PRs are going in to work on that and to kind of edit some of the initial EIPs to make their header files structurally compatible with the Jekyll hosted website. So that's looking really nice. And then after that kind of gets going, we're going to look at redoing parts of EIP1 to make it a little more clear, especially to make a better separation between standard track and ERCs, amongst other things, and some of the stuff we've talked about in previous core dev meetings. On top of all that, at the recent FCC conference about 2 weeks ago in Paris, there was a group called the Fellowship of Ethereum Magicians that met to discuss some of the issues we're having with EIPs and governance and kind of Ethereum technical topics in general. So, Lane, if you could just kind of go over briefly some of the stuff that came out of that meeting. I know you posted really good notes on Reddit too, so we can have that in the notes for this meeting and post it to the Gitter chat and stuff like that. But if you want to go over that, that'd be great.
Hey, Hudson, definitely. Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, so as you mentioned, Hudson, I took pretty thorough notes at that meeting, and I will repost that link here and in Gitter as soon as I finish, just giving you a really quick overview of what sort of the event looked like. Yeah, so by way of background, this is an initiative, the Fellowship of Ethereum Magicians, that was organized by Greg Colvin and Jamie Pitts. Kind of spun up over the past few months, so huge thanks to those guys for making the effort to do this and get it off the ground. And on the sidelines, I shouldn't say the sidelines, it was actually a workshop at EthCC a couple of weeks ago. The first meeting of the fellowship was held. It was, personally speaking, a really positive experience. It was a very, very full room. I don't want to put an exact number on it, but it was on the order of probably about 100 people in that room. It could have been 60 or 80. Many different groups represented, so from throughout the ecosystem, which I thought was really excellent. It was a lot of kind of high-level meta discussion at this stage, given that it was the first meeting. So, for example, Greg shared some stories of some of his previous experiences participating in various consensus-based decision-making processes. There was a lot of high-level conversation around the status quo, things like how EIP editors are chosen today, how the EIP review process works, the hard fork process, and basically generally how we can do better on those things. There was also a lot of experiences shared with how other groups do things, which I personally found helpful. So for example, IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, I hope I got that right, has some interesting processes that they use. Holacracy is another sort of consensus mechanism that some folks may have heard of. We discussed that. We discussed kind of the role of the fellowship of Ethereum magicians and sort of, you know, the fact that it's technically focused body led by developers, and whether there's a need for a separate process or body to discuss kind of the political side of things. There was some conversation around how to get more voices involved, right? So even though there were, as I said, on the order of 100 people in the room, obviously not everyone participated. So that was something people agreed is important. And generally consensus that meeting in person is important, right? That, you know, flame wars have existed since the beginning of time online, and coming together and meeting in person and showing our faces a few times a year is a really important process, part of the process of building consensus. And sort of the outcome of this meeting, which was intended to be preliminary, is that there will be a larger event, I don't know, call it a workshop or something, which is very likely to happen in Berlin around July. And there's a little bit of a question around how it's funded and whether, you know, some organizations are going to stump up some money to help people who couldn't otherwise afford to attend. As I said, I will share the link for those notes again here in the Zoom meeting and also in Gitter.
Okay, thanks very much, Lane. Is there anyone else who attended or has comments on the meeting in general?
Hey everyone, my name is Raul. Just want to introduce myself. I'm part of Prismatic Labs, and we're building the first sharding client for Geth. We're currently in the Taipei sharding workshop this past week, and we will be hosting a meeting discussing our implementation for phase 1 of sharding, happening tomorrow at 11 a.m. GMT -4. If anyone is interested, we have a Prismatic Labs Gitter channel where we'll be discussing this information and putting out a comprehensive roadmap of our first development sprints to get an end-to-end example of phase 1 working. So I just wanted to jump in and let you guys know what we're working on, and let you guys know that Geth is being one of the first clients in which this is actually being implemented. So yeah, thank you all for the opportunity.
Thanks, Raul. Yeah, that's really exciting. And stick around because we're going to be talking about the Taipei meetup a little bit, and I think that's what it was called, and go over some of the stuff people did on sharding and things. And then I see Liggy just joined. Is there anyone else who has comments on the Ethereum Magicians meeting or governance topics in general that they want to discuss or talk about? Okay, let's go back to the topic of EIP 712 now that Liggy's here. So basically, Lefteris brought up the topic of EIP 712 to see if we can get some traction on that. And I know that, Liggy, you've been very involved in that discussion, so if you wanted to give your kind of voice on this.
Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Great. Yeah, good that we talk about that. I basically like the idea. I just think we need an upgrade path, and the idea of I brought up with 191 there is not to replace it basically, but to make an envelope that we have an upgrade path, because we've seen, like in the discussion of 712, there are some things that would, like Lefteris was saying, extend the scope too much. Like in the end, translations is a problem, how to display the content to the user, because at the moment it's like from the user experience wouldn't be too good, would solve some problems, but wouldn't be too good. So the main important thing would be for me is that there's an upgrade path. And there is even like a simpler thing that could be done first, because I was talking to, for example, the guys who do the multisig for Gnosis, they could do with simpler stuff for state channels. And that would be like what 191 can already do. Perhaps we should finalize one of the simpler ones first, and then that perhaps even use that as a container for 712. And there's the main question is, do we need backward compatibility? Because at the moment, state of the art, it's basically broken. It's incompatible, the old sign data method, because of the length field in the middle of the whole thing. And we're also backtracking in this one EIP I was doing there, where that came in. That is an old quirk from Bitcoin that is just an implementation detail and survived and got a bit. There was an encoding problem basically. Go Ethereum is encoding it in ASCII. Trezor is encoding it binary. And in the end, we don't even need that because we have the whole length and just subtract the prefix there. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just to add a minor note, it's also important to know that Ledger and Trezor are doing it differently, which means that probably signing is really, really freaky currently in the ecosystem. So I'm not sure whether it's worthwhile to try to keep backward compatibility. The interesting question that we should not, however, forget is there might be some clients depending on it, which means the only fair thing to do is to actually reach out to the community and see who depends on it and make sure we don't break anything.
Yeah, and we can make it much cleaner if we don't need backward compatibility. If we need it, I think 191 is a really good thing. Otherwise, I think the prefix is still good because the main thing to currently is to like make it different, a normal transaction from no transaction. And I think, but later on, we even need a context there to differentiate between different state channels, for example. And I think a context could help there. I was calling it prefix in this one thing, but prefix people don't really like the prefix perhaps because of the old incompatibilities there. Perhaps the solution is just call it context, that we give some context for what the signing is worth. Because from the UI perspective, you also can then do like trust on first sight things that, when you first interacted, for example, with a state channel, the user can mark a field. I interacted with that one, and when he signs something for another thing, we can make it clear to the users that it's a different thing.
Ligi, can you maybe explain the prefix a bit more? Because I'm not sure I totally understand the utility.
At the moment, there's just one prefix used, basically. It's this Ethereum signed message. Like, that's this old prefix signing. That's basically the prefix that is there that distinguish from a normal transaction. If it has this prefix, it cannot be a normal transaction. So, but if you could do different prefixes, you can differentiate between different state channels or different use cases, because we will have the same problem we solve currently, I think, later on also. Because then we don't want to distinguish only between transactions and, for example, state channels, but between other use cases. That also I think we need the use case or the context as a field in there.
But couldn't that just be part of the application? So if you want differentiation of something, you just add extra fields that do this difference.
The thing is that you want to be able to have no malleability, so that if I have a data signed for a state channel, it doesn't happen to coincide and can be parsed as data for some contract which does something else. So it's good if we have a general framework like E191 that set out kind of where is the identifier for the context. And within that, we can have 712 as one of the variants. Is that how we meant, DJ? Yeah.
Okay, are there other comments on this?
I'm also for not maintaining backwards compatibility because I also believe that there are no production systems that rely on this because it's so totally broken right now anyway.
Yeah, for this, I also have to second that we shouldn't maintain backwards compatibility. If we wanted to do what Peter suggested, so ask the community if anybody depends on it. How would we even do that?
We're still small enough we can look at some of the major projects and see who hasn't commented in the thread. Because I thought I saw something where Trezor was in there, at least. And there's only like 4 or 5 major hardware wallets. There's only 5 or so major mobile browsers, and then there's multiple clients, but we can cover them all pretty quickly as well. So it's not impossible at this point to get what would be considered broad consensus. And if we miss one, it's, I mean, as long as there is consensus amongst most of them, I would say that's good enough to get the EIP approved, and then changes in the actual clients that are then, put in release notes and stuff. So that's my take on it. Other EIP editors might have a different opinion, but that's how I see this kind of moving forward. So what we'll do is I put this, I already have the agenda for next meeting up on the PM GitHub repository. So I already added this again, so we can talk about this in 2 weeks and just see where we're at, so we can continue to get this moving. Any other comments on this? Okay, great. The next item is actually Metropolis, but I kind of want to skip that just because I think it would do us. I think it would be better to talk about research updates and the recent sharding related meetings, because um, with the updates from there, we'll be able to better get a sense of what needs to potentially go into Metropolis, or even if we don't get a sense of that, we kind of know where research is at with Sharding and Casper and that kind of stuff. So, Vitalik, since you're leading a lot of these efforts, if you could explain kind of what the recent meetings, what they produced, and then we'll go with some other people in the room and kind of get their take on this, specifically with Casper and Sharding. Not doesn't have to go into too much detail about where we're at or timelines or anything, but just what you think came out of the meetings.
Okay. And the retreat, I would say, focused on like 90% on Casper. There was a bit of sorry, on sharding. There was a bit of a Casper section because myself and Vlad and Nate and so forth were all there, but sharding was definitely the main theme. So we spent 3 days talking about a variety of just sharding related topics, going through the sharding phase 1 spec that just been published about a week ago. And basically going through the various details like the collator proposer games, execution games, and some people brought up like very sub issues with the current protocol. We came up with some improvements. We'll probably do another round of thinking about improvements. Generally, kind of got everyone who was there on the same page. So that included both the kind of core Ethereum research team and people from Parity, Status, Prismatic Labs, Pegasus, which is a Consensus's team, and a couple of other independent people. Like otherwise, got to know each other. Talked about just like various kind of like theoretical cryptoeconomic issues to do with designing sharding protocols. Talks about what the roadmap would look like and what the longer term would look like. So the basic roadmap is this kind of multi-stage approach where stage 1 is like basically an implementation of sharding that is kind of rooted inside of the main chain, and where the main chain and where there is no state transition function. So basically, it's not sharding anything that like the data that's being included in the sharded chain doesn't actually end up getting processed as transactions. It's just considered to be a kind of data, and the system gets consensus on the data. So like that by itself is mainly useful for like things like Leroy or like Twitter on the blockchain or whatever. Then kind of in parallel and likely to come soon after that would be stage 2, where we basically finalize the state transition function and create a way for clients to execute the state transition function for any given shard. This depends on finalizing account abstraction. It depends on finalizing WASM, and it depends on finalizing the new Merkle tree, which is no longer, which is as of today likely to be no longer a Patricia tree. It's likely to be a sparse binary Merkle tree with some kind of second layer compression that makes it basically just as efficient with like 1/5 the complexity. There then stage 3 will basically include both white client execution functionality and cross-shard functionality. And then stage 4 is what we call tight coupling, where we basically try to incorporate the shard chain into the main chain together, so that the main chain would be considered invalid if any invalid shard chain block gets in. And we expect that to happen at about the same time as a full Casper. So we expect hybrid Casper to happen in parallel with somewhere in between stage 1 and stage 3 of the sharding rollout. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So just maybe to add to that a little bit, definitely a lot of really interesting discussions. One thing that's definitely worth noting is on the third day, we had a big meetup. And that meetup is actually recorded. And so anyone who didn't check it out, we did 2 panels, one with a bunch of the node implementers, and then the second one with just a bunch of researchers, Vitalik, Vlad, John, and Justin, and, everybody. And check that out on YouTube. It's on All-Star Panel Ethereum. If you YouTube that, it should come up Taipei as well. But yeah, it was really, really exciting. A lot of good idea propagation, for sure.
Awesome. That sounds good. So what I'm gathering from that is that there is, whereas I'd say some parts last year there was this notion that Casper would go in before sharding, it sounds like Casper's going to be on a shard now.
No, that's incorrect. So this is very important. Basically, the sharding spec is specifically designed so the sharding rollout is like absolutely totally independent of what happens on the main chain, as long as the main chain continues to work and provides the functionality of like basically having blocks and accepting transactions. So the Casper FFG rollout will happen on the main chain, and it will basically happen and be rolled out like in parallel with the sharding rollout. So there's separate processes that we expect will very likely happen and basically around the same time.
Okay, understood. Does an EIP need to be created for Casper as a complete, thing being implemented?
Yes, I will definitely. So regarding implementing Casper, so the components are, so number one, there is the fork choice rule change. Number two, there is the change. There is one hard forking change to the protocol, which is basically the mechanism where Casper votes can be included for free. And there's another hard forking change to the protocol, which is basically cutting mining rewards and adding Casper staking rewards. So the consensus complexity is specifically designed to be relatively low, basically because most of the heavy weight lifting is done by the Viper contract, which is in progress of being formally verified by the runtime team now. The other third part of AES Casper implementation is the voting strategy. So this is basically the proof of stake behavior that's equivalent to mining and proof of work, and that needs to be implemented across clients.
I see. Okay. And is the idea potentially to have this go into Byzantium Metropolis Part 2?
It depends on timing. Like, if timing happen, like if we want to, we can totally have Metropolis or Constantinople just be the Casper fork and at the same time like do whatever other things we wanted to do. If we decide we want to do a couple of other things faster, and then like it might be okay to like call that Constantinople, and then Casper can be can be called whatever the next hard fork is.
I see. Okay. That's an important decision to make. And yeah, I said Byzantium, I meant Constantinople a second ago. Okay, well, that's something we can discuss a
Yeah.
little bit more. But before we jump into that, does anybody else who was at the event or have any comments about the event, like Raul or Peter?
Yes, absolutely. I think, it's important to mention that there were a lot of different sharding client implementation teams there. And one of the things that we were discussing was figuring out at what point are we going to converge and possibly work together towards a testnet implementation. One of the things that we discussed was creating a common repo there's already a sharding repo in the Ethereum GitHub where we plan on having more structured markdown documents, aligning everyone on maybe like the smart contract API that we will use for the sharding manager contract. One of the things that could be useful, perhaps, if you could mention, Vitalik, was how sharding will be done through the contract and how that's different than maybe the Casper contract, and plans to maybe merge that global validator set into one in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So and it's definitely it definitely is the goal to eventually to merge the validator sets and merge all the functionalities into one. I guess the general philosophy here so far is basically that like phases 1 to 3 of sharding and phase 1 of Casper are both going to kind of happen separately for kind of simplicity and ease of implementation reasons, and so they can both actually be independent of each other and and also be kind of self-contained and safer. So if Casper fails during phase 1, it's relatively easy to just like issue a hard fork or you can just tell people to run a switch on their node to fall back to proof of work. And if sharding phases 1 to 3 fails, that basically only affects the user of that system. And then sharding phase 4 and Casper phase 2 are this kind of great remerging, and and the validator sets can be unified and everything can be unified. And that's when we'll basically start recommending that like all new activity be done inside of the sharding system. And we'll have goodies like hopefully soft functionality within like something like 5 to 12 seconds, but we'll see.
Cool. Yeah, one of the other things I wanted to mention is that my team is focused right now on a local testnet implementation of phase 1 sharding on basically a private Ethereum blockchain where we will forego some of the P2P considerations. That's one of the biggest unknowns that all the sharding teams got out of the event, that the peer-to-peer networking for sharding is something that we still are a long ways ahead from figuring out. So we will just get the whole end-to-end example working without P2P on a local testnet. And then after that, we will proceed from there by collaborating with all the other sharding teams.
Sounds good.
Yep. Just jump in there. This is Ben from Consensus. So it was great to be at the workshop. Some awesome ideas discussed. Like Raoul and Prismatic, I think we have a sort of practical bent at Consensus. We're keen to get on with making implementations, and Raoul's identified some of the critical points. So we all need to talk to one another. I think our other concern would be to try to accelerate some of the timelines that were discussed during the course of the workshop. We're keen to make this happen as soon as possible, and that will require a lot of collaboration. So we need to set up the mechanisms to make that happen. But yeah, thanks for the invitation, everybody. It was a great week.
Just to add a slightly go back to what Raoul said previously, that currently the peer-to-peer networking layer of Ethereum is really non-friendly with sharding. So currently the network just assumes that everybody wants to talk with everybody, and it's just big blob of protocol. And with the sharding, if we want to split up the Ethereum blockchain to 100 shards, then all of a sudden you don't really want to talk to people outside of your shard, or there are certain nodes that will want to talk to multiple shards, certain nodes that will jump in between shards. And these are really features that the current peer-to-peer protocol does not support. Now, Felix has been trying to spec out, I think he's working on at least 3 concurrent DIPs on trying to push forward in this direction. But I think it's definitely a thing that we kind of need to pay attention to, that sharding will not be possible without a peer-to-peer overhaul. So we shouldn't forget about it and only focus on the consensus parts.
Was Felix at the meetings?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. Any other
Any
comments?
One more interesting problem, at least from my perspective, it was really interesting, and that's why I'm bringing it up, is that we had a very nice discussion about, so as long as, for example, if you have 2 smart contracts and they communicate within a shard, there are various solutions that we can do. But for smart contracts that communicate between shards, it's kind of less trivial, because the obvious solution, so when you kind of have to access data between multiple shards, that data that might actually change between or while you are accessing it, then it becomes all of a sudden this distributed system synchronization problem. And we had a really nice discussions in how locks could work or could blow up, or how, for example, really interesting challenges of what happens, for example, if you try to obtain, basically you run the transaction, you want something from the other shard, but then your shard all of a sudden reorganizes, which is a really interesting challenge. And we also went a bit into thinking whether, for example, message passing architecture versus the classical locking mechanism would be more appropriate. So going towards queuing theory and these sequential communicating processes stuff. Now, we don't have any concrete solution, so we are just debating the upsides and downsides. The reason I wanted to mention it is that I think this is a hard problem to solve, and it's definitely can use a lot of people in the community thinking about them and just bringing up ideas. So I think we should, this is something that the community should feel free to jump in and try to figure out.
Speaking of community interactions, another fruitful debate that came out of this was the discussion around the time value of storage on the Ethereum blockchain. We had a lot of discussions about rent at the meetup, and specifically discussions about how we're going to interact with smart contract developers to understand their needs, like to get their voices heard to implement this. So I was wondering if Vitalik could mention a little bit about this discussion.
Yeah, so basically the idea is, that we talked a lot about is storage rent, which basically means that if you have a contract, that contract has to pay some amount of ETH per block per byte in order to stay alive. And the reasoning behind this is that right now there is this imbalance where, on the one hand, creating like very short-lived contracts is arguably a bit too expensive, but like more generally, creating contracts that last forever is way too cheap. And there's a whole bunch of different kind of exploitability vectors. So, like for example, Gas Token launched about 1 or 2 weeks ago, which basically uses S-store filling to kind of save up gas when gas prices are very low, and then the gas token contract can be called, and you can consume gas tokens to like basically have it clear one of its storage keys and give you the 10,000 unit gas refund whenever the gas price is much higher. And so basically the entire system does a bad job of like properly, like sufficiently pricing contract creation, making contract creation pricing non-volatile, and making kind of correct incentives to clean up storage. Like right now, like basically no one really cleans up storage, even despite the 10,000 gas net refund. So there's a pretty strong, like between all of that and the desire to keep a small state size, which is going to be important if we want fast thinking to be viable in the long term. idea of basically charging per byte in contract storage has become fairly like a major proposal that like a lot of people are in favor of. And I mean, so there are like some different versions of this that we discussed. We spent a lot of time discussing the user experience issues. So basically, like, in what way would having to like keep contracts alive harm the user experience? In what way could we reduce those harms? In what way could we simplify the developer experience again? I'm actually in the process of writing up a proposal based on contract resurrection right now. So like, I feel like the research community like feels that something like it is important, and there's a lot of like discussion going on right now about the details.
Okay, thanks, Vitalik. If the community does want to get involved, would ETH research forums be the best place to go?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Are there other comments about the meeting or the topics discussed? Okay, great. So yeah, it sounds very promising. Everything seems to be moving faster than anticipated, so that's great. Um, I'm I'm on the fence about asking about timelines only because the meeting just happened. So what I think I'm gonna do is not ask about timelines, so CoinDesk doesn't put out an article saying we're gonna be done tomorrow, and or done with Sharding or Casper tomorrow, and we'll talk about that the next time. As far as Metropolis
Hi
goes,
Peter. Hi Rachel. I know you're listening.
wait, what was that again, Vitalik?
Hi Peter. Hi Rachel. I know you're listening.
Nice. Yeah, that's the editor and the another CoinDesk person. Um, let's see. I'm looking last at the last meeting notes because we talked about. Oh, where'd it go? Oh, so we agreed upon a few things that are going to be in Constantinople, particularly EIP 145 for bitwise shifting and the EVM. Um, block hash refactoring is something that is likely to happen because it's going to help a lot with some of the things we have coming up. That's EIP 210. And then there's some other ones we are looking to add, potentially just something that reduces gas cost if we can do that and it makes sense. Um, so we were initially going to finalize things over the next month or so, but with this recent meeting, I think that everyone's real anxious to get a hard fork out, and that's understandable from the community's perspective, I should say. The community wants to get changes out and for things to get done, but there's not that many super radical changes happening in Constantinople currently without Casper or Sharding. And so, from my perspective, I think that we shouldn't be rushing to get a date out for the hard fork, even though we were initially saying we were having things like account abstraction in there that's now delayed. We were thinking it was going to come out in the first half of this year. I think delaying it's going to be the best bet, or not delaying. Really, we never set an official date, but pushing it out further sounds like a better idea. What's everyone's thought on that?
Well, I think currently.
I would.
Go on.
I would generally just say that like I think we should try to move away from the idea that hard forks are the only thing to get excited about, because like at least I personally feel like get the impression that the community is definitely excited about the big ones, but like no one's uh, going around and saying like yay, like the IP number 87 or whatever the numbers are. So I think that like as far as like making people feel that there is continued real progress that we'll see soon, like even things like client optimizations and making like clients work much better are also a totally worthwhile target, and they'll probably end up ultimately improving the user experience by more than base protocol changes can, at least in the short term.
What was your comment, Peter?
Yes, I was only saying that as far as I know, the only thing that's actually fixed that would be nice to ship in the next hard fork is the bit shifting ops. So nothing else is really set in stone. So I don't really. So
Yeah. There is actually one other possible thing that we wanted to consider, which is I know that in gas, the cryptographic, the elliptic curve, the OTN 128 operations one became faster by a factor of about 10. So if parity manages to, and like possibly harmony manage to speed up theirs a bit too, like it might be cool to try to cut down the gas price costs for those operations by a factor of like 3 to 5 or so, because that would really go a long way in making like ring signature stuff and like zero knowledge proofs and so forth more viable.
Yeah, so just to say a few concrete numbers. So basically we have, so for the BN256 curve, we have currently 3 operations: addition, multiplication, and pairing. And we kind of switched out our library, our implementation for these. Now, addition was fairly cheap, so that one got about a 2x improvement. Multiplication got 20 to 25x improvement in Go Ethereum. So that's insanely fast. And pairing is about, I think, 4x, give or take. So about 4 times faster than our previous implementations was. With the current, the problem is that these are the raw benchmarks, which are kind of, I think here the meaningful thing would be if we could find, of course, the benchmarking purely the opcodes is important from a denial of service perspective. But I think it would also be really helpful if we could have some meaningful tests to actually run. I mean, meaningful contracts that use these and not just call additions a gazillion times one after the other. One test that I did find was Christian's Zcash Robston verification contract. And currently I kind of turned that into a Hive test. And it performs really well. So actually running the whole Zcash verification on Go Ethereum with the current code is about, I think, 25 milliseconds. That's how much it takes on my laptop. And a tongue-in-cheek thing that I'm kind of currently happy about is that the BN250, basically that contract, so the Zcash verification is currently about 3 times faster in Go Ethereum currently than parity, which kind of, I assume then the same optimizations can be applied to parity and get them on par with these speedups.
Yeah, that's really good news. Because I know there's been a lot of discussion about it being very slow to do these elliptic curve functions on the Ethereum blockchain. So it sounds like at a client level, it's sped up faster. That's cool.
Yeah, though, so it's still not spectacularly fast. And for example, a really interesting thing that I only realized now while doing this optimized version is that the curve that we are using, so the official, basically to verify that a point is on the curve or respects all the requirements in the official curve, it requires one less multiplication. So essentially just parsing a binary blob into a curve point in our curve is a lot more expensive than in the official curve. So that was a bit of a bummer when I realized it. But there's nothing we can do about it. One potential thing that what I was actually considering, but these should be benchmarked, is that, for example, our precompiles in the elliptic curve, they kind of, so for example, when the pairing points, when I parse them, so every time I want to do an operation, I need to revalidate that they are valid curve points. And maybe if we could somehow split the validation and the operation itself, then it could make it a bit cheaper gas-wise. But maybe it's too dangerous, I don't know. These are just random thoughts.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds really awesome. Okay, cool. So is there any other comments about Metropolis timeline, EIPs going in, anything like that? Otherwise, we'll talk about it, of course, next meeting and come up with some more ideas around timing and how far along some of the research topics are.
So, but I guess, Hudson, the question that you kind of asked is, do we want to make a hard fork pretty soonish with not that much content, or do we want to save up for a gigantic pile of hard fork? Right?
Yeah.
I think the answer was that we should make a hard fork that actually makes sense, and currently we don't have enough content for it to make sense.
Yeah, the hard fork we would have, like if we did a hard fork tomorrow with what we've agreed on, it would be 2 things, I think, 2 EIPs, and then potentially one more if it would get spec'd out the rest of the way. I think it's Vitalik's one that isn't fully spec'd out yet. Let me look at which one that is real quick. Where is that? Oh, it was EIP 210 block hash refactoring was the other one that needed to be needs some more work.
Right.
Okay.
My take on it is that I would rather have more hard forks with less content in each than having gigantic hard forks.
That would also help make it so that people would get used to hard forks is a potential side effect.
But don't forget that hard forks are always a huge strain on Dimitri and Yoichi.
Yeah, that's true. So, I mean, if we started this, if we decided, all right, we're doing these 2 EIPs for a hard fork, starting tomorrow or something, not the hard fork tomorrow, but starting testing in a month or two, like that would put a big rush on them. Actually, I should clarify with Dimitri. Dimitri, if we were to decide on doing a hard fork with 2 EIPs, would this new testing framework you develop, would that interrupt progress with that, or would that be something that you'd be able to implement the new testing framework at the same time you're putting these tests in?
Well, I actually would prefer to restore the existing test functionality with CPP client and the new testing tool. But if we really need to, we could still use old testing tool to create tests for the new rules. Like currently Yoichi adding new tests for bitwise shifting. Is that the hard fork you're talking about actually?
Yes, that's the hard fork I'm talking about.
Oh, so this time tests are already on the way. A couple of pull requests from Yoichi with these new tests are already added to the test pool.
Okay, interesting. So that's actually not as much of a showstopper as I thought it would be.
Yeah, but we're talking about bitwise shifting here.
Oh, yeah, that's the one that he just said was test we're going in, right?
Yes, but that's fairly easy to test. So
Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah. Okay, and block hash refactoring would be much more difficult, is what I'm guessing.
yeah, more or less.
Okay. Yeah, so it sounds like we don't have consensus on this today. I don't even have an opinion on this anymore, just because I don't really know. So Martin, you're saying that we should have multiple with small additions to it. No one is really advocating for a giant hard fork, but no one's also saying that when we should have the next hard fork. So we'll have to discuss this more. Okay. Any other comments on that? All right. So we got the last thing on here is client and research updates. A lot of clients who couldn't make it here today posted their updates in the agenda. So if people want to look through that, I'll be going over them as we hit those clients. The first one we'll go with is Parity. So Parity posted theirs as a text update, and Afri's also here. Afri, I know y'all just had a major release that put some really cool features in. Do you want to kind of just go over those?
Yes, can you hear me? I'm at a conference lobby. It's just a break right now. I hope it's not too noisy.
Oh no, it's a little noisy in the background, but I can still hear you pretty clearly. So go right ahead.
Okay, yeah, I posted my updates in the issue. I can just read through it. Yes, we had a major release, and we finished integrating our Parity WASM virtual machine, and we are deploying it to the Kovan test network to see some more live testing. Yes, we are about to finish to outsource our actual user interface, our wallet, to a standalone Electron wallet. And yeah, I posted some details about some more minor changes like light sync improvements. Whisper is getting a command line interface. We are completely overhauling how we deal with the transaction queue, and yeah, we're factoring our engines for future PRS implementations. And obviously, the first one will be Casper. If you have any questions, let me know.
Great, thanks. The only question I have is, do you have any insight from Parity's participation in the EWASM retreat that happened right after FCC? Was there, have you heard of any collaboration with the other WASM client development teams?
I personally was on vacation the last 2 weeks after the conference, so I don't know exactly if there was any, but I know that at the conference in Paris there were productive discussions, and I hope this will continue after that.
Okay, thanks.
Hudson,
Sounds great.
I can speak to the WASM stuff if you want to do a WASM update as well.
Oh yeah, that'd actually be awesome. You were at the were you at the retreat some? Yeah, you were.
Not in Taipei, but I mean in Paris. Yes, we did it.
I'm calling them both a retreat for some reason, but I'm talking about the Paris WASM thing. Let's just do that real quick. Go ahead and do that update, and then we'll do Geth after.
Cool. Yeah, so we did, I called it EWASM University in Paris. It was really, really great. We had Sergey from the Parity team there with us. We also had folks from TrueBit who've been working on some WASM stuff, and a couple of other teams that joined us for part of the week or so that we were doing a sprint in Paris. We discussed there are definitely some differences between the implementations. So for example, the way we do metering is a bit different. There's a couple approaches here, like one is metering contracts at deploy time versus metering them at runtime, and there's a trade-off here, and one gives more flexibility around kind of changing gas prices in the future. There's some consensus. Sorry, I should mention we had Martin from Definity with us as well. So kind of a lot of the folks working on WASM. There was definitely some discussion that it would make sense to come to consensus on some things like metering and maybe shared libraries across the different implementations. The only other thing I'll say on WASM today is we're still definitely making progress moving forward. Aiming to get a WASM testnet up on the order of weeks from now. There was some conversation between the EWASM team and the folks in Taipei about the connection between WASM and sharding. I don't know if Vitalik or anyone else wants to speak to that or what that roadmap might look like, but it just sounds like it hasn't been worked out yet. The timing there and kind of, whether we're still aiming to get EWASM into a shard or into sharding more generally, or whether there's a chance it might go to mainnet. I guess we haven't sort of figured that out yet.
So, I mean, regardless of mainnet, I'm pretty sure it's absolutely clear that like WASM is going into sharding and going into all shards.
Interesting. So it wouldn't be a VM edition that would happen before sharding, it sounds like.
Well, I mean, if we want, we could decide to try to find ways to incorporate WASM on the mainnet, but like in the shards, it's definitely happening. And the shards are, I believe it is consensus that shards are never going to see one single block of like old style EVM execution.
Interesting. Okay. Sounds good. So, wait, does that mean that like Solidity wouldn't work on sharding? I think I might have understood that wrong.
So Solidity could work through two channels. One is the EVM to WASM transpiler, and the other is Solidity is currently reworking itself to compile through Julia, and Julia has EVM, and I believe is planning to have WASM as a backend.
Interesting. Okay, that sounds good. And yeah, I have seen the Solidity to EWASM, and that's looking pretty good right now. Okay, thanks for answering the questions. Let's move on, unless anyone else has comments. Let's move on to Geth's updates. I think that'd be Peter.
So we don't really have any too spectacular updates. We did basically, I think it was about 1.5 months ago, we did a major release, and since then we're kind of just polishing up the stuff and just trying to figure out what next major feature we want to add, which is basically what I think currently the most painful point is the synchronization, and we had a discussion about that in Taipei along with the parity team and Frederick, and we're kind of thinking about somehow converging on a new synchronization model, because both fast sync and warp sync are starting to break down and show different signs of issues. And so currently I'm just playing around with a few ideas that may or may not work out. So that's and Felix is also playing around with the discovery protocol ideas. Jood's playing around with light client ideas. Martin Liggy playing around with the signer ideas. So I think currently we're just we want to make sure that any bug that we find in our current releases get fixed, and just trying to pick a direction that will bear fruit for the next major release.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we can do the C++ client, which would be Pavel and Andre.
Yeah, so mostly it's like half of the work was about to add support for WASM engine, and so that's all of the stuff going on around the VM and EVMC interface. And the second part done by Andre is mostly bug fixing and improvements related to database, peer-to-peer network, blockchain sync, and yeah, that's all, I guess. Unless Andre want to add something to that.
No, not really, nothing to add. Yeah, I mostly work on continuing to fix issues around synchronization and database layer.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Quick question. What synchronization are you guys working on currently?
So by fixing the issues, I meant mostly the full sync, because it still has some bugs in it. Really, I'm trying to debug that. But we have as well the warp sync type of synchronization implemented as well, or it's not actually finished, but it works already. So we use Parity's warp protocol for that, and yeah, that can be used too.
Okay, just asking because if there's even a potential chance that sync protocols might get bumped up, and you guys will also be interested in it.
Yeah, sure. Let us know.
Okay, great.
One more comment is that I'm also interested in any future ideas for intermediate synchronization protocol bumps, because warp sync is about to collapse due to the huge state size.
Yeah, in fact, I think, Peter, was it mentioned by you that Parity actually talked to you at FCC a little bit about, or maybe it was the Taipei meeting about warp sync being broken?
No, so it's I mentioned it. Actually, I think I also mentioned it here that I talked quite a lot with Frederick about it in Taipei, and we discussed the various issues around fast sync, warp sync, and that basically both of them are kind of crumbling under the load, and we kind of need something that's more flexible. I mean, both of them can be patched, but maybe it's better to just figure out something that can scale for the next 2 years instead of the next 2 months.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Love collaboration. The next one is Harmony. They're not able to be here, but they said that they did a release with performance improvements. 1.70 and 1.71 is the latest version. They also have good progress on Casper research, and they're waiting for updates from PyEthApp to adopt them and set up a test network from scratch. The one that they currently had fell apart last week. The cause was it fell apart a week ago because of deposit scaling factor became 0, is what they said. So they're going to be redoing that from scratch, it sounds like. I don't think there's anyone here from Ethereum JS, is there? Okay. Um, Trinity, the PyEVM one, Web3 version 4 is nearing a stable release, and the first Trinity Alpha is around the corner. They're polishing up some minimal MVP with a minimal subset of light client sync, JSON RPC API, and you can do Python REPL with a Web3 instance. So that's pretty exciting. What do we got next? We did a research update already.
Hudson, a quick question regarding Trinity. I'm not sure whether you talked to them, or I'm not sure how well you know how they're progressing. So it's a pity that Piper is not here. That Python REPL kind of caught my eye. Do you think whether that is going to be shipped inside Trinity, or whether it would be an external tool?
Reading the update, it sounds like it's going to be shipped with it. But that's just from me reading this update. I have no other information.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Finally, TurboGeth implemented the hash file optimization. Hashes of the top 5 levels of the state hex tree and memory mapped file, it says. There's a Medium article that kind of explains it a little bit that's linked on the agenda and the test TurboGeth update. Fixed a lot of tests, started to fix the API functionality, and started to test sync with normal memory. Quote, normal memory is 4 to 16 gigabytes, and found a lot of issues, so he's fixing them now. That's from Alexi. Were there any other updates? Raul, you kind of gave an update earlier, but did you have anything else from Prismatic Labs, or Ben, do you have anything from Pegasus that you feel like mentioning?
Sure. So I in the chat I mentioned the meeting that we're having where we're going to be discussing our exact development sprint for phase 1 sharding with my team. Also, I linked the Gitter channel there, and if you guys are interested, you can just join there and track our updates. But we'll be releasing also bi-weekly development updates via Medium and our mailing list. That's on our website. So if anyone wants to know more, just definitely PM me for more information. But that's basically it.
Nothing specific from consensus side. We press on with development of our client, and we'll be open sourcing it when it's in a sort of fit state to do so. So watch this space.
Oh, did you say that was a client? What was the language?
Sure. So we are developing a full Ethereum client. So this has been mentioned. We haven't made a formal announcement of it yet, but it's no secret. And so that will be developed and open sourced and provided as a consensus supported client. And will be fully mainnet compatible. And sharding is part of that. So we're doing the sharding client alongside that as well.
Awesome. Oh man, I feel embarrassed now. Jason Carver's here. Jason, are you on? He might just be listening.
Yo, what's up?
Hey,
yeah.
you're with the Trinity team, right?
Yeah, I'm working on transitioning over to it, but I've done some contributions. Are you asking about the integration with the Python REPL?
Yeah. Do you know about that?
I think it's a very early stage idea, but in terms of if you want a Python REPL for connecting to other clients, then I don't think it's much different than just using Web3 Py.
Yeah, so essentially so for example, the reason why this was brought up in Go Ethereum, that Go Ethereum since forever shipped with a console, and the Go Ethereum console is kind of like really, really legacy based. So basically it's a Go JavaScript interpreter, and it's based on a kind of an old spec. It works fine as long as you don't want to do really fancy stuff. So as long as you use it as a simple CLI tool or debugging tool, it's fine. But if you want to enter fancy JavaScript territory, it's not suitable. And so what we're kind of considering is, so we don't really want to drop the console because it's a valuable debugging tool, but we were actually wondering whether we could actually create a completely separate Ethereum console that is just the JavaScript console based on Node.js or whatever latest and greatest tool there is, and the latest Web3.js. And then people could actually connect to Go Ethereum nodes or basically any other node and have a really nice way of interacting with it. And since you guys said that you are actually considering creating a REPL for Python, I was actually wondering, so if you can actually make a Python console too, then it would be really awesome to have both the JavaScript and the Python console that can attach to basically any other node.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I mean, from our point of view, it would just take a little bit of wiring code to say, if your Geth instance has all the connection parameters you need, you could start up a Python REPL with a Web3 instance already configured, ready to go. I don't think it would be all that much work, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think I just want to pop this idea along that if so, for example, for us, we don't really want to drop the JavaScript console because everybody kind of got used to that, and it doesn't really matter whether we find a better language. It's kind of just in the community or everybody's used to it. But I think it would be really awesome to be able to actually provide different or other means to interact with nodes.
Yeah, that sounds really great. Let's sync up offline.
Yep.
Awesome. I think that was the last client or research. So Nick Johnson joined. Nick, we talked about EIPs earlier, and I briefly mentioned your stuff, but not in a lot of detail. So if you want to go over any of your updates to what you've been working on in the EIPs repo and your Jekyll stuff, go right ahead.
Sure. Yeah, sorry for me saying the earlier part of the meeting. So I've been working on some changes to make EAPs more accessible and readable and indexable and so on. I've converted the EAPs repo into a Jekyll site, which means it will automatically build an HTML version from all of the EAPs and index them by type and status. You can see a preview of that on arachnid.github.io/EAPs. I'll link it in the chat. There we go. This did entail a couple of minor changes to the format of the header of EAPs. They all now have to be in YAML front matter format, which means that there's a triple dash before and after the block of metadata, and the metadata is in lowercase rather than uppercase. So if you have an outstanding EAP, it will need to be adjusted accordingly before submitting. I'm also adding a Travis script, which will automatically check EAPs for validity on all open pull requests. That has identified a couple of issues that need to be addressed in order to fix the build. Specifically, there are two EAPs, 198 and 778, that are unmerged but referenced from merged heaps. So if the authors of those two, 198 is Vitalik's and 778 is Felix's, would be able to work with me on getting them polished off and merged, that would be great, since they're both referenced from either hard fork heaps or from other ones internally. And in particular, 198 lacks a copyright assignment, which Vitalik himself needs to add. Nobody else can add it on his behalf. So it would be really good to get those merged so that we can fix the build and then do automatic checking of all future ones. There's also half a dozen EAPs, mostly older ones, that are referenced from EAP 1 as examples of good EAPs that actually aren't merged either. Those are less urgent, but it would still be good if anyone wanted to go over them and help merge them or fix them. They're all listed in the EAPs channel on GitHub. And other than that, I am planning on writing up a meta EAP documenting some suggested changes to the EAPs process, but that can wait for the next meeting. And that's it.
Thanks, Nick. Great update. And I posted the link in the Core Dev Skitter and in the chat here and on YouTube. So that's all around. Does anyone have any other comments, updates, anything like that? We're out of agenda items. Okay, thanks everybody. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks, and shout out to Lane for writing up the notes to this. He's done it for the last few meetings, and he's doing it for this one. So Lane, great job, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Hudson.
Thanks, Lane.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
See you.
Bye-bye.